Now turn to part 3. You will hear 3 different talks or lectures. In each talk or lecture there are 5 questions. For each question, choose the correct answer A, B, C or D. You will hear the talks or lectures only once. Now open your questions paper and look at talk or lecture 1. You now have 35 seconds to look through the questions and the options in each question. Now we are ready to start. Listen carefully.
Frank, tell us about some of the ships you've discovered.
Well, there's nothing quite like finding your first old ship. It was 300 years old. It was just lying at the bottom of the sea, so it wasn't difficult to find. Most are covered in sand and rocks, but this one wasn't. I'm actually a teacher, not a full-time diver. I dive in my free time, but I often get to them before the professional divers because I have good, up-to-date equipment. Another thing that helps is talking to fishermen who tell me about their local area. I've even written a book about some of their experiences. At the moment, I'm looking for the gold from a ship called the Seabird. It was an enormous, well-built ship, and it was coming from Australia on a winter night in 1859. Everything was going fine until the ship reached the English coast, when it crashed into some rocks in a very strong wind and sank to the bottom of the sea. It was carrying gold from Australia, and most of it is still at the bottom of the sea. My wedding ring is actually made from gold, which I found on an 18th century sailing ship. A friend of mine, another diver, has already found £88,000 worth of gold from different ships. He's now decided to give up his job and become a full-time diver. My house is full of things like coins, bottles, and old guns. My wife is always complaining about the number of objects around the house. She says I should open an antiques shop. But I love all these old things. Anyway, in the end, I gave some things from my collection to museums, because I didn't want to sell them. But my wife still wasn't very pleased, I'm afraid. As diving is a dangerous hobby, it's not a good idea to try to teach yourself. I'd advise anyone interested to do what I did. There are some excellent diving clubs, like the one I joined, which run courses for beginners. It's best to do one of these before you go on a diving holiday.
Now open your question paper and look at talk or lecture 2. You now have 35 seconds to look through the questions and the options in each question. Now we are ready to start. Listen carefully.
Well, I'd like to tell you about some of the historic places open to visitors in this part of the country. Let's start with the oldest first. Black Rock Caves have been here for over 2 million years. And for 500,000 years, they were home to people and various animals, particularly tigers. You can explore these ancient homes and imagine what life was like for the people who lived there. The caves are open daily from April to October. A special attraction on evenings in August is a walk by candlelight. Don't take this tour if you're afraid of the dark. Next, I recommend a visit to Salter House. This was built by Sir Joshua Salter and dates back to 1765. The Salter family are still living there today. The house became famous in 1982 when the television series Aunt Dorothy was filmed there. The furniture and paintings are well worth seeing, but the attraction nobody wants to miss is the kitchen. This is where Aunt Dorothy cooked her enormous meals and gave advice to anyone who passed through this part of the house. And don't forget to visit the Old Port. You'll need several hours to see everything there, especially if you take a trip along the riverside in an old tram as far as the fishing village. The guides there all wear traditional costume, and you too get the chance to try on clothes from 100 years ago. You can buy gifts in the old village stores and eat delicious snacks in the tea shop. If you visit the village factory, you can see how sweets were made 100 years ago, and taste them too. So you see, there's plenty of...
Now open your question paper and look at talk or lecture 3. You now have 35 seconds to look through the questions and the options in each question. Now we are ready to start. Listen carefully.
This lecture is going to introduce you to traditional Chinese philosophy. First, you will learn about, the yin and yang philosophy. Secondly, we will look at the 5 elements of this philosophy. It is important that you remember these 5 elements as we will be discussing them throughout the lecture. The 5 elements of yin and yang are water, wood, fire, earth, and, metal. Okay, so those are the 5 elements. Let's begin with a definition of yin and yang. Yin and yang should be considered as opposite forces, like land and ocean, for example. These are opposites. Now, these opposites do not compete with each other. They are complementary. When you think of yin and yang, think complementary opposites. So, moving from complementary opposites, let's return to the 5 elements we mentioned earlier. If you recall, we said they were water, wood, fire, earth, and metal. The Chinese divided yin and yang into 5 elements to gain an understanding of how the body, mind, and spirit work. According to the Chinese, every person's physical and mental health relies on a balance of the 5 elements. Individuals may have more of one element than another. Of course, ideally, all elements are in balance or harmony. What does this mean? It means that a person's body contains equal amounts of each element.
That is the end of part 3.